You ready? Welcome in, Joe Kuchera with the Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you again for checking in with us today. Be sure to download the podcast. You could do that a couple different ways. One, you can go to iTunes, just type in Real Estate Radio Live. You'll see the podcast, download it there. Also visit our website when you get a chance, reradiolive.com. We continue to get the message out via podcast. It continues to grow. We appreciate the followers on Facebook. Thank you for those that interact and continue asking us questions and the feedback. We love it very much. Let me introduce my guest in just a second. During the week, if you want to reach me, a couple of different ways you could do that, 408-838-9060, or you could always email joe@reradiolive.com. We're excited about a series we started about 3 weeks ago. This is part 3 with Jack Russo, who's a managing partner with the Computer Law Group in Palo Alto. Jack, good to have you back today.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
These are a lot of fun. Jack and I have had, if you've been following the show, we have some background, almost 20 years, and a lot of exciting stuff in the Silicon Valley going on. If you're here, you live here, you do business here, you know what I mean. It doesn't stop. It seems like every day you're hearing about something new. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars are going into startups every single year. Matter of fact, it's probably billions, right? I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
It's a huge amount, and I realized Silicon Valley is such a special place. As I was going in my car to drive over to Joe's office and radio booth, I almost tripped over this robot that was rolling on its own, and I was like, is there a movie going on here in the parking lot? And some 16-year-old kid running this thing said, we're delivering lunch to a bunch of your colleagues. And I was like, lunch? He said, that's a rolling, roboticized refrigerator.
So and it was a refrigerated robot?
Refrigerated robot running on battery power that was pre-programmed to stop at different locations along University Avenue to make deliveries into office buildings. And he said, oh, yeah, in like 6 months, this will be completely and totally anonymous. They'll be rolling up and down the street delivering lunch.
I don't know what just popped into my mind. This, but I'm thinking you never have to worry about sexual harassment or, right? I don't know what else.
I said to him, what are you going to do when two guys who are hungry pick up the box and walk out on a pickup truck? Oh, we have all the GPS locations. We'll track them down.
Oh, man, this is funny. Well, this is a perfect really lead off into the show. We're having a lot of fun and excited to talk about Silicon Valley startups and how things get started. In the first couple of series, we talked about intellectual property. We're going to wind that down today and finish up with intellectual property and then continue this series. So be sure to check in on a regular basis. And the beauty about the podcast, as you know, is you could download it, listen to it at your convenience, anywhere you want. We're also getting a lot of international followers, which is fun. It's good to see. So,
I got a call, in fact, this morning at about 7:30 a.m. my time from someone in Paris. It was roughly 4:30 in the afternoon there. Said, hey, I saw you on Facebook, and it's really amazing, and you know some people I know, and I'm trying to bring my invention into the United States. We have a following here in Paris. Can you help us? So it's a small world, getting smaller all the time.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I'll have Jack, if you can, Jack, just give our audience, again, a quick overview of your background and the law firm and your general practices, and we'll get started.
So I'm a managing partner at a firm called Computer Law Group. We've been in Silicon Valley and specifically in Palo Alto, but we have a national practice. It's going on over 35 years. I've been in practice for nearly 40 years. I started at a small firm that's now a big firm called, back then it was Davis, Stafford, Kelman, and Fenwick. Now it's Fenwick and West. They're in Mountain View, but they have a national practice. And we represent entrepreneurs, startup teams, growth companies that are trying to hit the big time.
Yeah.
So we often see people literally at the garage stage when they're still trying to figure out what they have, how they're going to position in the market, what they need in terms of investors, in terms of growth planning, and in terms of intellectual property protection. And of course, we do a fair amount of litigation because even those companies get into fights with similar small, medium, and large counterparts.
Yeah. And that's a distinction I want to just real quickly have you hit on, because you specialize in that. Not all law firms, as we go through these series, would be willing to help entrepreneurs and even have conversations with them, right? They're just not either they don't have the skill set or they're not in that type of business in the direction of the firm that wants to take on something like that.
Lots of firms will screen out people who they think are wild and crazy, and we tend to look at those people and think those are the
open the doors.
Those are the change makers. I think Apple ran a great program, a marketing program, an advertising program years ago that said it's really the unusual folks that break the paradigm and make. I mean, who would have thought a refrigerator could become a robot? But effectively, that's what those folks this morning were doing.
That's good. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about intellectual property. Just as a summary, the first couple of series we had, Jack touched on, in general, intellectual property, securing domain names, taglines. When you have an idea or you have a business, go in and just to summarize, really, I would think attain as many as you can, right? They're cheap. It's really cheap. You never know, and you never know how the business is going to evolve. We talked a little bit about that. Some of the ideas, protecting ideas. Let's talk today a little bit about patents, trademarks, more specifically to patents. One of the first things people probably always want to know is, I'm guessing, is this patentable, Jack, and
Right.
How do we tell?
Right. So let's start even before we get to patent.
Okay.
You have an idea. You've staked out the domain name. You may have even had a lawyer or yourself file what's called an intent to use trademark or service mark application. There's mechanics for getting that done. And we'll cover that at some future time, the mechanics. But you want to know whether this idea can actually be protectable and defensible, because good ideas get copied rapidly, and oftentimes a bigger competitor can wipe you out overnight by you not having any form of intellectual property protection. So I brought in a little prop, which is, for those on the video will see, it's actually a standard handset for an old-fashioned dial-up phone. Well, phones used to have dials, not buttons. You literally would dial. I'm really dating myself here. Then they went to push buttons, but the handset looked like this black piece of plastic that now is available. Someone decided to take this otherwise generic-looking device, and it is fairly generic and probably not protectable as a trade secret, even when secret, because it's such a functional, fundamental design. But what they did is they said, well, we're going to customize it with a few special buttons, which I didn't show you, but there are buttons on the handset that allow you to turn the volume up, to mute it, to turn it on and off. They essentially enhance the handset with a little bit of electronics that they put into the handle, thereby creating some new value. Now, during the period that they had that idea, if they kept it secret, and assuming it has commercial value, which I think it does, because they have sold a fair number of these to people that don't want to put the heavy battery from their iPhone or their other smartphone. They don't want to put that battery against their ear. So they plug this in, and then they have the handset to use in lieu of that battery, which some people worry could give you some bad radiation.
Right.
So the idea is to basically enable people to use their phone at their desk without having that heavy, because there's a weight difference, and without having that battery against it. Now, when that was secret, before they showed it to anyone who was not trusted or was not otherwise subject to a non-disclosure agreement, there was some state law and now federal law, because we now have a federal Trade Secret Act as well, statutory protection for the enhancements that were made, even though the generic handset is otherwise in the public domain, because it's been around for 50 or 60 years, and anything that might have protected it has expired, because patent rights eventually expire. But the enhanced version may well be separately protected. So once published, you need something other than trade secret law. That's where patent law or copyright law or trade dress law comes in. We're going to cover now patent law. What they would do, what an inventor does is, and a really smart inventor gets really savvy and knows how to handle this stuff, him or herself, is file what's called a provisional patent application. A provisional patent application would take the various features of this phone and discuss why they add new value, sometimes called novelty, not something that's readily available from past devices, and that these features, and this might be the hard issue here, that these add-on features are not obvious. So it's a two-part test, really a three-part test. The invention has to have utility, which is the subject matter test. It has to have novelty, that is, it's not a copy of something already out there. It's got some difference that adds some newness to it. And then the third hurdle, which is the ultimate test, is it not obvious? That is someone skilled in the art of doing handsets able to say, you know, I wouldn't readily see putting those buttons there makes sense. Now, maybe most people would, most people doing these designs would, but that's where oftentimes people will file the provisional expecting that if they get to the next stage, which is typically funding or a manufacturing deal or a distribution deal, then they'll put the extra money in. You have up to a 1 year period.
That makes sense. So let me ask you then on something like this as we talk about this phone.
Yes.
The provisional patent you talked about as the first step, the first logical step, which is really smart. Now, don't you have a better chance, and we'll talk a little bit about someone coming to like your firm or with you to file that provisional patent on their behalf or alongside with them, rather than them just willy-nilly fill something out and send it in?
That's right. A lot of people don't want to spend the many years studying and understanding the patent laws or the patent regulations or dealing with patent examiners, so they will come to a law firm like ours. We will typically take a step back and ask what is going to be the intellectual property strategy for the family of devices, because you can immediately think, well, maybe the better idea is actually a headset. Maybe the better idea is a microphone with a headset if you're sitting at a desk. So we might say, what's the branding that you're going to do, and how can we create backup intellectual property rights around the trade dress? And the reason I brought in, for example, the FedEx envelope, besides the fact that it's a really cheap, convenient way to put papers together, is if you look at FedEx, FedEx created a brand, the FedEx name, well-known, red, blue, and red. But I don't know if you've ever noticed, they've got that little arrow that's kind of hidden subtly. You can see it if you pay attention to it. There's a little arrow that points from the E to the X. Oh. Do you see that?
You know what?
It's hidden.
I never.
You can't see it very well. You never realize, but it's like a subtle thing. In fact, Hillary Clinton copied it in her campaign. If you ever look at Hillary's campaign.
That's amazing.
But right here, I just circled it. I would need more of a black circle for people to see it. There's an arrow that goes forward in the orange X part. They created an actual, what's called a trade dress element to their packaging to signify to your unconscious that they are always moving forward with their deliveries.
I love it.
So we might say to the founder of this business or the inventor or the team, if they all come in, what can we do to this phone that might differentiate it and create an associational value? So we might say, or I might say, why don't you create kind of an easy way for the four fingers of one's hand to wrap around the phone instead of it just being generic? And why don't you make these buttons more like little keypad buttons, almost like playing a saxophone or playing a device? Because then we might get an associational value that FedEx has gotten with the arrow in a way that even if the patents don't last, don't survive, or not defensible, we have a secondary way to differentiate the marketing and the success of the distribution of the device. So people will say, well, I want the one that your fingers go in and handle it like a musical instrument. And in fact, we might even suggest maybe some of those buttons can play music. Like if you're calling someone for Valentine's Day, let's remember Valentine's Day is coming up tomorrow. So for those out there with sweethearts, if you can imagine having a phone call with him or her and then pressing a little button that has a recorded love song.
From your 1960s handheld phone.
But you get the drift that you start to act interactively with the team. And they start saying, yeah, we could put a USB plug in this and actually you could have your music and you could actually have a way to signal to whoever you're calling that you're going to talk about a topic of romance, because the mind works quickly when it hears a certain sound.
And maybe there's a feature where it vibrates, right?
All
all
sorts of
kinds of
concepts.
different things you could.
All sorts of things.
So this is a great illustration. What you're saying is you could, an entrepreneur or someone could take something that's very obvious and existing and bring an idea to you or someone and say, listen.
It happens all
Does
the
it?
time.
Okay.
The refrigerator rolling, the roboticized refrigerator was a refrigerator on a four-wheeled cart with some new intelligence baked in. That is a new invention. Yeah. That is the robot. The cart existed before. Think a little red cart that you pulled your kids in years ago. I used to pull my kids in the cart, and the refrigerator sitting on top of it. Those two things pre-existed, but you marry them together and you put some intelligence, and now you've got a robot that's delivering lunch.
That's good stuff. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back in segment 2. Before we do that, Jack, though, remind everyone where they could reach you if they want to talk to you or your firm.
Sure. Computer Law Group. We're in Palo Alto. It's computerlaw.com on the internet. We're at 650-327-9800, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. We typically, when we see new entrepreneurs, we don't charge for the first half hour. Or certainly we take your phone call for free, see if we can help you, see if we can add value. We want to make sure we're helping people that really are on a path of success. We want to help them get to their next stage.
Yeah. All right. Stay with us. Those on Facebook, we're going to take a quick break, about a minute. We're going to come back. We're going to continue the conversation with Jack Russo. We're talking about intellectual property, specifically today, patents, how to go about them, and some of the examples. We'll be back with you to continue in just a minute.
Thanks. Time just goes so fast, doesn't it? It's
I don't even
amazing.
know how much time did we have there, Ronnie? 16. Oh, look at that.
So you go for like
pretty
20,
good. I don't even need a clock anymore.
25 minutes or 29 minutes, 30
so
minutes?
So we're 16, so we'll go another maybe 13 or 14, something like that.
So it's a pretty fast half hour.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you were to get it transcribed, what the total number of words would actually be, because we both talk so fast, right?
That'd be interesting.
Be an interesting next step, because that Zoom device has some sort of automated transcription. It would be a good call-in test at some point.
It does. I know that every time I do a Zoom conference, it automatically records.
And it also gives you a transcript now.
Yes.
They're actually doing a conversion. Yeah. So you're getting a transcript to see, well, what more could you say? Like you could have a footnote about here are the steps to actually get the trademark registered, and here are the steps to do this, and here are the steps to do that.
That's good stuff. That's a good example.
Yeah, it's a pretty basic example, and
I never knew about this.
Yeah,
Ron,
it's hidden.
Did you know that?
It's a little hidden. That little thing is hidden,
it's
but
one
it's
of
on
those,
all the trucks.
What do they call those books when you're younger? You kind of look for the things that are mystery, kind of hidden and all that. Yeah. That's what it reminds me of.
Well, it's very subtle. So sort of a psychologically subtle way to lead your mind to see that those trucks are moving down the path. Everything's always moving, right? Always in delivery mode.
Yeah, their original name was Federal Express, right? That's a story in itself. Mr. Fred Smith with that one?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Ready, Ronya?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready.
Welcome back, Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. As we continue through the week, our guest today, we're doing a regular series, a group of series here. We're going to continue to last the next several months on and on. There's so much to talk about with Jack Russo and his firm in terms of today, you know, in general, the overall series is about entrepreneurship, startups in the Silicon Valley, how to get started. This is kind of this is a breeding ground. If you've been here for a while, you know the ideas, the thoughts, they're born here. There's a lot of ideas. It's amazing all the money, time, and energy spent in startups and technology. And today, specifically now, we're talking to intellectual property. As we go forward, we're going to really cover many, many topics. But again, we're going to kind of wrap up intellectual property today, Jack, in our third show here. You were talking about this phone. You made some examples of that. Today, we're talking about patents. You talked a little bit about provisional patents. One of the things I did want to bring up is maybe you could talk a little bit about the fact you're using examples of physical products here.
Right.
Are they in general easier to get patents on than, we talked about the internet space.
Right.
Talk a little bit about those two differences.
Right. So we have had, I've been doing this now, it seems like forever, 4 decades. And when I first started, software was mainly protected by trade secret law. Why? Copyright was unclear. Patents were non-existent. Mm-hmm. People didn't know how else to do it except by written agreements, and there was a lot of transaction cost in getting signed agreements. And eventually Congress recognized that software would become a more prevalent item, consumer item even,
right,
as small computers started to make their way,
right,
as we made it from the mainframe days, my college and graduate school days of the mainframe computer, to mini computers, to finally personal computers, to network personal computers, now to internet worked in the internet. Every computer, every device, everything, it seems, will be on the internet in some form. And so the law sort of lags behind, but it catches up eventually. And as I said, at one point, I was lucky enough to be at UCLA in law school at the time. Mel Nimmer was on the Cantu Commission, which was the commission that was studying whether copyright should extend to computer software.
Wow.
And as a law student, he was a mentor of mine. He threw the report at me and said, I'm so busy trying to figure out what to deal with, whether copying should be allowed inside libraries on copy machines. Would you take a look at this software stuff? You have a master's degree in computer science. You know something about computer software. You've been programming for a while. And I studied it, made recommendations. Ultimately, that legislation passed with Mel Nimmer's comments, some of my comments.
When was that again?
This is back in the 1970s.
Wow.
And it was an amendment to the 1976 Copyright Act that became the Software Copyright Amendments, or the Software Copyright Act of 1980. So we've only really had a formal copyright law for software since 1980, but since then, copyright has expanded. Copyright is the law that protects the expression of any work. So right now we're expressing ourselves in a work that's getting recorded. That creates a copyright in that work. If someone writes something, like you have some notes in front of you, a copyright attaches to that. It's very cheap because all you need to do is keep a copyright notice. Of course, most people forget it, but you use the word copyright or C with a circle or both with the year of publication and your name if you're the author. Or if you're working for a company, it's the company's name. And that protects the basic text, graphics, and other information that often will go on a website, for example, the content. And so typically by the point that you're deciding what your entire battery of intellectual property will be, you will have trade secrets that have turned into provisional patents, business plans, distribution plans, graphics, and other materials, marketing materials that are protected by copyright and perhaps still trade secret if they're unpublished, and maybe some trademarks staked out for what this brand is going to do, and of course domain names for the way in which you're going to put a fence around how you're going to market this if it has any form of online marketing. And then you're right at the point of deciding, once you have that intellectual property strategy figured out, what type of entity will I use? Most people do not rely on being sole proprietors. Why? Because if there is any liability, you're personally liable as well. Now, a lot of people have a hard time with that. Well, why should my personal wealth be impacted by someone putting this phone to their ear and somehow burning their ear because something of the electronics inside of it burned? A very rare event, but it happens. So we've simplified, the law has really simplified the creation of an entity. Even before LegalZoom, one could create an entity pretty rapidly, but we've really simplified throughout the United States, Delaware in particular, California as well, all 50 states have some type of limited liability company, sometimes called an LLC, or a corporation, sometimes called an Inc., and there are pros and cons on whether you use an LLC or whether you use an Inc. Typically, if you're running it as your own little initial startup, you'll start in the simplest way with a limited liability company. typically, if costs are important, you would start, if you're located in California, you would start in California. As you grow and as you take on investors, there might be some pressure to relocate it in Delaware because Delaware tends to have a more stable and more robust body of corporate law. And in fact, once you hire employees, you're typically going to convert into a corporation because a corporation gives you certain other benefits in terms of an operating company. And sometimes you actually end up having two entities, a limited liability company that will hold all your intellectual property, and an operating company that will actually do the marketing and is licensing the intellectual property. Now, why? Because if the operating company fails, like let's take that little roboticized refrigerator, the intellectual property may be in a separate LLC licensed to that first operating company because that first operating company might fail, but they may be able to salvage the intellectual property into a next operating company that realizes it's not the small robot that they need, the one that I almost ran into today, but the bigger version. That is that's going to deliver hot pizza. And it's going to deliver it in a fabulous hot way. That isn't quite that device because that device is refrigerated and cold food for lunch. And maybe they'll realize, there's far more demand for hot pizza delivery. And that's where there's a lot of people that want that and want it quickly and want it in a way that really can keep it fresh and hot and not just in one of those bags that the current delivery people deliver it in.
Yeah, I mean, that is amazing. Along those same lines, I saw today, I don't want to get off topic, but Burger King decided a big push. They're going to use, I think, what's the food delivery service, Grubhub or the other one. But, that's a kind of a quick example how people want these services and they want them now, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's kind of funny. Normally you would think people would want a meal in itself delivered, but apparently a hamburger, a taco, or a pizza is just as important.
The world is becoming so centered around the way people get their internet. And it's just a funny footnote to the story. There are times when if you go to a hotel and it doesn't have fast internet, you think that the hotel sucks.
Right. It's true.
And the hotel might be a 5-star hotel otherwise, and they might be thinking, who cares about the internet? We've got an Olympic-sized pool and a hot tub and a this and a that, and you want to be in your room with the internet.
That's so true.
But if you talk to concierges, they will say a high priority in a hotel now. In fact, often they'll offer 3 flavors, the no-charge regular speed, the higher charge, faster. And then, man, if you want full video and the full virtual reality experience where you need very fast broadband, you're going to pay a high daily rate for it.
Yeah. That's amazing how things have changed so much. We got a couple more minutes in this show. What else should we kind of summarize with the patents? I guess as we go into the next topic, what does someone need to know? Again, it's always you have your idea, come to someone like yourself. Right? Try to vet it out. Even before, would you encourage, I don't know, I guess it depends what juncture. When would you encourage someone to meet with someone like you in your firm? Would it be right out of the gate, as soon as they have the idea, maybe after they do some vetting, maybe they do some sketches or ideas? Let's say it's a physical product.
I like to say to people, do your homework, and doing homework is not as painful as it used to be.
Right,
so
that's true.
With the folks that call me from Paris, I won't release their name, but I said to them, I know 6 or 8 other companies that are more or less in the same space. And they were like, really? And of course, when you're in Paris, beautiful city, but you're in the European Union, you're a different time zone, you're not necessarily paying attention to what's going on in the United States any more than we're not paying attention really what's going on in the EU or China or Japan. But eventually all those worlds start to converge, so you have to pay attention. So I gave them some links to search on, and I said, you really should now create a list of how are you different than these 6 or 8 other players? Because that represents the prior art against your invention being validly subject to a U.S. patent. But more importantly, it creates the challenge of getting above the noise. If someone is already delivering on something satisfactorily, it takes a lot of momentum to break that inertia. So if you're used to using Facebook for your video show and someone says, well, why don't you do a show on LinkedIn? We have a video facility.
Good point.
You might say this works.
Yeah.
People like it. It's easy to get to. I don't need to go to LinkedIn. But if they gave you a single button way to transfer the video content from Facebook to LinkedIn, and they said, we have a more sophisticated audience, they made it super convenient. Maybe they even paid you to do it.
Yeah.
That changes the game.
Good point.
So you see, sometimes it's good enough, but sometimes even the incumbent gets hurt because they've got what they think is a solid, stable audience, but then the audience gets moved to another platform.
Yeah.
Hey, this has happened before. You know, Facebook is not the first community that's existed. Facebook wiped out a lot of the previous communities that existed. I can remember when CompuServe was a form of community among the techies and nerds who wanted to get their questions answered. Of course, there were no photos. There was none of the flash that Facebook has, but it was conceptually the same thing. There was a community of people interacting with each other.
Yeah.
That's history now. And there's lots of other examples that predate Facebook. So sometimes it just takes a little more, a little better, a little faster, a little cheaper, and all of a sudden you're ahead of the game.
This is really good. We just got a minute or so left. And I guess I want to set the stage for the next show. I know we're going to continue to talk about a lot, but you got me thinking as we're having this conversation, really around the person could think that they have the best idea in the world, right? This happens all the time, which is great. You got to start somewhere. And that may not have anything to do with the consumer thinks about it.
That's right. That's right. And it's an amazing thing if you can afford it. It's not the easiest thing to do, but we've done it and we've helped clients do it. There are actually rooms you could rent with two-way glass where you bring in 20 to 30, sometimes even 50 people that don't know you, don't know anything, and say, we got something that we're going to try to sell into the smartphone market, just to use this handset as an example. We're going to give you each a chance to use it. Yeah. We want you to call on you, because everyone's got a smartphone. We want you to call. Of course, someone won't. Someone will have a flip phone and say, well, it doesn't plug into my phone. And you'll start to realize certain parts of the market are being excluded, and you might need an adapter. But you learn a lot from even small samples. Yeah.
The focus
you learn
groups.
A lot. And they can be expensive if they're not done in a way that I would call kind of a bootstrap way. A bootstrap way is Craigslist, come in for lunch for free. Yeah. Bring in some Subway sandwiches. Don't do anything too expensive. Hope that you get a decent cross-section, but you can ask people to send their details. Are you a man? Are you a woman? Do you not want to declare? Are you this? Are you that? And that basically arrange 50 people in a good mix. You can rent out a community room, often from a church or a community center. Parking is right there. People show up for an hour. They get a free lunch, and you give them maybe one of these to seed your market if you've already gotten your patents.
Although this
filed.
could even be done, as you're talking about, this could even be done in a webinar or online now these days,
People are doing it that way as well. In fact, people are also using something called Amazon Mechanical Turk, and what Mechanical Turk is people sitting behind their desk at wherever they are, housewives, house husbands, who want to earn a certain amount for a gig. And the gig might be, please watch this video and just tell us your first reaction.
Okay.
Oh, I don't want to be an old grandpa using this handset. It's not hip.
And you make $20 for
You make $20 for doing it. So for 50 people times $20, you got an immediate reaction. You've got for $1,000 a lot of market research about your segment is over 50-year-old people who know this, right? You're going to learn a lot.
Good stuff. All right. We're going to wrap up today, but we're going to continue. Remember to stay tuned. You could always go to reradiolive.com. Jack, thanks. Another good show.
Thank you.
Continue
Thanks,
to have some good ones. Yeah,
appreciate
really good.
it.
Real quick before we duck out, if someone wants to get a hold of you, give us a website and a phone number.
So
again.
it's Jack, JCK, at computerlaw.com, computer, L-A-W, all strung together.com, or 650-327-9800.
Very good.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. Thanks for those on Facebook following us. Be sure to download the podcast at reradiolive.com. Take care until next time.